This episode of Creative Control with Vish Khanna is brought to you by the in-kind support of Pizza Trokadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton. Financial support for this podcast comes from listeners like you, so please visit patreon.com/creativecontrol to make a flexible monthly donation today. This episode deals with matters that some listeners may find troubling. If you or someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts, please talk with someone you trust. You can access information about 24-hour crisis centers across Canada at suicideprevention.ca. And in the United States, you can reach the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or suicidepreventionlifeline.org to chat with someone online. We need you here. Please take care of yourself.
No problem.
It's all right. Your video's still up. I don't know. Maybe it'll be fine.
Okay. Well, I'll sit over here.
Okay. Thank you for doing this.
Of course.
And so I'm going to reset for the audio just to say hello for the show, and then I'll obviously turn this into a print piece as well.
Okay.
And we'll go from there.
All right.
Here we go. Hi, David. How's it going?
Hi, Vish. I'm doing well.
It's nice to finally speak with you again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, good to hear from you.
And see you a little bit using the internet. Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. Hello, everyone. This is an episode I don't really want to make, I suppose. I mean, I want to pay tribute to David Berman today. And so this episode of my podcast is a bit unusual. If you listen to the show regularly, you know I'm not much of a monologue person. I like to talk to guests and people about their stuff. But David passed away. It's as I'm talking to you, it's Monday, August 12th. So on the 7th, I got back from a 2.5-week vacation and with my family, and then heard that David was gone. And at the risk of some measure of self-aggrandizement, I'm doing this to mourn. I'm doing this so that if you're mourning David, maybe we can commiserate in some ways. I guess that's what mourning is. Processing the loss of someone, however you do it. You remember them, and you remember specific things you experienced together. You remember specific attributes they had. That's what I thought I would do. That's what I thought I would do with this show that David has left a mark on. David's name has come up so many times over the course of conversations I've had with people who knew him, who worked with him, who were fans of his. I am a fan of his. And so this is not prepared. I don't know where this is going to go, but I wanted to mourn. I wanted to mourn David and remember David. And I just want to talk about David and me a little bit in terms of my interactions with him as a fan, as a teenager when I was 15, 16. Actually, you know what? Hang on. I have had a lot of trouble listening to David's music since I heard he passed away, but this is such a weird episode. I'm going to play some music by David in the background because I think it might be reassuring. Hang on a second. I'm just going to put a record on. Okay. I don't know. This might be distracting, frankly. So I first encountered David's music when I was in high school. I was a big Pavement fan. And the thing about being a serious Pavement fan, or maybe even a serious music fan, is that you obsess over everything. You obsess over every B-side, every single, every compilation appearance, every interview, whatever it was. And so that, whatever that was, led me to Silver Jews, which was David's band with Stephen Malkmus and Bob Nastanovich and occasionally Steve West. Those guys were in Pavement, and David would work with them. And I think it was... this is before the internet. This is like the early to mid-'90s, I guess. And so you'd hear about things through interviews, through magazines, through articles, through going to shows. And I used to go to Orange Monkey Records in Waterloo and Encore Records in Kitchener. I grew up in Cambridge, Ontario. And Encore in particular did a thing, which I'm sure lots of record stores do, where the section on Pavement would feature any related release. So if you were looking through the Pavement, you'd find the Hey Drag City compilation or eventually the Brain Candy compilation. You just find related things. So I don't know this for sure, but if I were to speculate, I was thumbing through the Pavement section at Encore Records as a teenager, and there was something called Silver Jews. And it was probably Starlight Walker, or I don't think it was the Arizona record, but I think it was Starlight Walker, which was the first Silver Jews album. And at the back of it is a photo of David Berman flanked by Stephen Malkmus and Bob Nastanovich. And so I brought it home, and Stephen and David are singing together on the first song, but then David starts singing songs on his own, and then I realized that this was David's work. And his voice spoke to me, and his wit spoke to me, his attitude spoke to me. Everything about it I loved, to the point where I was into kind of harder music in terms of stuff I was trying to play as a kid, like, you know, post-punk, post-hardcore music. That's what I tried to play. But my friends Steve Lamke and Dave Emmerth had a kind of a thing we would do sometimes where we just record stuff on a ghetto blaster, and we call ourselves Pop Machine, and we would kind of do stream of consciousness things, and I would just rip off David. Something about his approach to songwriting really spoke to me, and it always has. It just always has. Since I was, 15, 16? As I talked to you, I'm 41. And something curious happened to me. I went to university, and I started to slowly write about music, review albums for the university newspaper, and try to contribute to the radio station, CFRU, in some ways, here and there. And when I finally graduated university for good, I did an undergrad, and then I did a master's degree. And then when I finished that in the early 2000s, I started to write more professionally or for more established magazines. And so at some point, David put out a record called Tangle with Numbers. I mean, his previous albums, I just would get every one, and I remember distinctly The Natural Bridge, which is playing behind me right now, and American Water. I mean, those two hit me in very particular ways where I wasn't sure about myself, and I was heartbroken for sure here and there, and I just put them on, and they really helped me. I just had this relationship with this music, and he's this enigmatic guy. He never toured. He just put out records. There was occasionally interviews and things, but rarely. He was just his own thing. And I never thought I'd see him. I'd see everyone, and I never thought I'd see him. But then he put out this album, Tangle with Numbers, and I, at this point, had just sort of started freelancing for a magazine, and the opportunity came to speak with David. Not exactly. I should rephrase that. What it was really was I could interview him if I wanted to. I could actually talk to him over email. It was an email interview. He was only doing email interviews, I guess, is what I'm getting at here. Sorry, I'm fumbling. This is all... I haven't prepared anything here, so forgive me. I'm trying to pull up something here. Oh, yeah. So he was doing email interviews for this album, Tangle with Numbers, which I loved. And so I got to email him some questions through his publicist at the time. And then I wrote this article. I don't stand by what I wrote necessarily, but I'm going to read you this very short article I got to write about Silver Jews and David for Exclaim magazine, and my date here, in terms of when I submitted it, says October 2005. And the headline I chose was Silver Jews Choose Life. And the reason for that title is because David had just come out of a very dark and depressing period in his life, and he'd committed self-harm. He intended to end his life. And this was part of the promotion of this album on some level. So it had to be addressed on some level as sensitively as I could, and I did my best to ask him about it. In retrospect, I could have been more sensitive about asking someone about such a thing. But he fielded it. He fielded the question. His response to that period in his life was, "The list is lengthy. I was living incompetently. Now I've got it made in the shade. I clip my fingernails. I write what I like to call positive rock. For instance, my newest MP3, Love is like a bowl of Chex Mix." Indeed, Berman has retained his sense of humor on the latest Silver Jews album, Tanglewood Numbers, his most jubilant record in years. Songs like Punks in the Beer Light and How Can I Love You If You Won't Lie Down are raucous and reckless, making for a spirited punk rock record. It's still strange to me that it came out sounding so fierce, Berman agrees. It's almost like I'm going backwards. More bands start out brash live bands and slowly cut out touring as their albums mellow out. I'm like an old man who's growing into a baby. Floating among guests like Steve Malkmus and Will Oldham is some of Berman's most religious imagery. Well, I think it's interesting that as I've gotten older, I've grown into the band name, he says. In the very beginning, I thought of it as almost conceptual art, and on the first albums, I wrote about God, mostly because almost no other secular artists do, and I naturally gravitated towards the unemployed signage. Now that I'm older and subspace is colder, I've really turned into a Jew. So that's the piece I wrote about David. He's quoting one of his old song lyrics there, I realize now. So this is like... I've interviewed a lot of people, and by this point in 2005, I started to talk to a lot of people, but to get to email questions to David Berman and have him field them was at the time a pretty remarkable thing for me. I mean, it's still, when I look back on this, I haven't looked at this stuff in years. It took me a while to find some of the things I'm going to be sharing with you today. Yeah, and then we got this news that David was going to tour. He put out this record, Tanglewood Numbers, and then he decided he was going to do some touring behind it. Just to, I don't know, he'd always resisted it. I don't think he really saw the appeal of it. He thought of himself as a writer. And so the first leg of this tour happened, I'm just looking it up. Did I review it? I did. Sorry, I'm just Googling stuff. It says here, according to the internet, on March 25th, 2006, I went to the Blind Pig in Ann Arbor, Michigan to see Silver Jews and Spiritual Family Reunion. I haven't read this. I'm going to read this to you. I've not read this before. I'm sorry. I haven't read it since I wrote it. And I just came upon it. Let me read you the review of what was, as I recall, the final night of touring. Okay, here's what I wrote. You guys came on the right night, David Berman mused mid-afternoon, several hours before his electrifying gig at the Blind Pig. It's the last show of the tour, and number 11 is going to be the best one. Let me interject here. This is true. My friend, Stephen O'Sullivan, if you can see a photo of me with David Berman, however you're accessing what you're hearing right now, the guy on the far right is my friend Stephen O'Sullivan, and I don't know if it was his idea or mine, but he loved David. He loved Silver Jews, and he said, let's go to Ann Arbor. There's no Canadian date. Let's go to Ann Arbor, Michigan together. So me, my now wife, Michelle, and Stephen and his buddy, whose name I can't recall, drove down to Ann Arbor to see David Berman and Silver Jews. And we got there in such a timely manner that the first people in Ann Arbor, Michigan that we spoke to were Bob Nastanovich and David Berman. And Stephen said, you should bring your copy of David's poetry book, Actual Air, with you. And I said, yeah, I'm not really an autograph person. I don't have autographs. I don't collect them. I don't see the point of it. But I will bring my copy of David's book. I love Actual Air. It's a fantastic poetry collection. Sure. So I meet David. I've done an email interview with him. We've never interacted. I meet David, and it's a brief interaction. I tell him we exchanged this email interview thing, and he remembers it and says, Canadians are always really kind to me, and I love talking to them. Thank you. He thanked me, and that was our interaction, and then I went to the show. Sorry, I'll go back to the review. I'll start again. You guys came on the right night. David Berman mused mid-afternoon, several hours before his electrifying gig at the Blind Pig. It's the last show of the tour, and number 11 is going to be the best one. I don't remember really quoting artists in live concert reviews, but clearly this meant something to me. Over the past 13 years, Berman's reputation as a recluse who never tours, coupled with dispatches of erratic performances at Nashville bars, has rendered him more myth than man. Naturally, an announcement about a first tour was met with shock, excitement, and anxiety from longtime fans. In the end, Berman and a killer Silver Jews lineup put on an unbelievably amazing show. Spiritual Family Reunion leader Patty LeMay drove straight from Nashville to open up and was joined by SFR bassist and Jews guitarist William Tyler and Pavement's Bob Nastanovich, who never played with LeMay before. While LeMay's songs were compelling, particularly Shane, Nastanovich's drumming proved distracting. Oh, man. Bob and I are buddies. I'm sorry, Bob. I don't know why. A little dig at Bob there at the end. I was expecting that. Anyway, soon enough, Berman and the dapper Silver Jews ambled on stage to a huge roar from the audience. With wife Cassie aglow on bass, Berman happily chatted to the crowd before consulting his trusty music stand for the lyrics to Pet Politics. From there, the band nailed songs from almost every Silver Jews record, with obvious standouts including Random Rules, Trains Across the Sea, Slow Education, and intense takes on Smith & Jones Forever and Dallas. Tanglewood numbers like Punks in the Beer Light and Sometimes a Pony Gets Depressed were downright ferocious, and Nastanovich made a triumphant return to scream along with There's a Place. Peering amiably through his prescription designer shades, at the end of a glorious night, Berman thanked the sweaty faithful for their patience, promising they'd see the Silver Jews play live again soon enough. All right. Well, other than digging at Bob, I stand by that. Published May 1st, 2006. Silver Jews, March 25th, 2006. So, go to that show at some point. I don't know the chronology on this, but they will... Oh, no, I do know the chronology on this. Let me stop myself. So, they do this, and they do this tour, and I think they did another leg of it. And then, shortly thereafter, I think within a couple of years, there's a new Silver Jews album called Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea that comes out. And I, again, am afforded the opportunity, potentially, to speak with David. And I will tell you more about that conversation soon. I will. It's relevant to this episode of the show. I will say that after playing some shows behind that album, Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea, one of which was in Toronto, and I got to see it, David announced in 2009 that he was shutting the Silver Jews down. He wasn't doing it anymore. And he wrote a blog post saying that some of that had to do with his father, Richard Berman, who was a lobbyist, a conservative lobbyist, and really one of the architects for how the conservative movement smears people and engages in character assassination to their conservative ends. And then David kind of disappeared. He had a blog. He had a blog that he would tend to, and he would appear here and there. There would be these kind of, poetry readings and other kinds of musical appearances in Nashville where he lived. But from 2009 on, he was really mythical if he wasn't already beforehand. And every once in a while, I would talk about David with someone who I either knew him or admired him. And at some point, I started I started working for CBC, actually, CBC Radio. And in 2012, I ran into Stephen Malkmus at the Sled Island Festival in Calgary, and it was just after a compilation by Silver Jews called Early Times was issued by Drag City, and it captured a 7-inch and an EP. And I asked Stephen about that while we were in Calgary. It's pretty minor conversation. Actually, I have a clip of it. Here's Stephen just talking a little bit about David. I was thinking about you recently because a couple weeks ago, this Silver Jews thing came out. Mm-hmm. Early Times.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, this is a kind of a compilation of some obscure and rare...
Really early things I recorded when I was a young guy. And yeah.
Yeah. Did you have any input into the creation of this particular release?
Not into the reissue.
No?
I was involved at the start, of course, because I was in the band. But I'm happy that it came out. I mean, it's really, really lo-fi.
Yeah.
You know, it's just three guys in a basement, and we have some good lyrics, and it's recorded just on a boombox.
Right.
But, you know, we had some good connections, because I was in Pavement, and, like, David was a charismatic guy. So we got to put ours out on Drag City. Most people wouldn't.
Right. And there's a song on there called Canada.
That's right.
And you talk a lot about, I think it's you, it's your voice, reciting all these things about Canada.
Yeah, well, you know, we thought it could be the idea was to make a kind of a theme, like a Olympic song or something for Canada.
We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
No problem.
So just a little bit of talk about David and Canada there. And then I started a podcast, this one, Creative Control, in 2013. And I proceeded to talk to people I admire, and among them were Will Oldham. Will Oldham was a friend of David's and someone who I'd come to befriend through this work that I do. It's an interesting phenomenon that I've been grappling with lately, that for whatever reason, I mean, you've heard this show. I develop these rapport with people, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but it seems to happen more frequently than it doesn't. Something about the work and the type of people maybe that I talk to as well, like their willingness to engage with fans and to take me and my questions seriously. I don't know what it is, but it comes up a lot. Hang on, I gotta flip the record. Okay, I'm back. So, yeah, Will and I have developed a rapport and a friendship and of some kind, mutual admiration, let's call it. And on episode 134 of this show, October 2nd, 2014, Will is back on the show, and we talk about lots of different things. It's a long one. We talked about so many things. It's like a 2-hour episode, which I don't remember. I just looked it up. Anyway, at one point I asked him about David, and this is where that line of questioning went. Now, I want to ask you about something that people bring this up to me all the time because they know I'm a fan of his work and that I've spoken to him a couple of times. You mentioned his father a little while ago. When's the last time you were in touch with David Berman? I'm just curious. We're all wondering about David Berman, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I know you're friendly with him, right?
Yeah. We're in touch on a fairly regular basis, and I'm sure that I brought his father up specifically because there's somebody writing, maybe for Mother Jones, an article about David and his relationship with his dad, which has been a big issue over the last 6 or 7 years. You know, so there's this guy who's writing an article for, I think it's for Mother Jones, and I did, I talked to him with David's permission because there's not, you know, it's just if someone had called me and said, would you mind if I participated in an interview about the relationship between you and your parents? I would say absolutely not. But so I called David, and he said, please do, go for it. So okay, you can't never speak to me again because of things you read in this thing.
Yeah.
Because you told me to do this, and
is David okay? Like, what's he up to? Like, I want to phone him. I want to call him and talk to him, and I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I should just do that because I just want to know what he's. Again, people ask me all the time. Should I just phone him?
I mean, it depends on how you want to talk to him. He attends to his email. But you could also, if you want to talk to him on a personal level, I'm not sure how to advise you, especially in this context, but if you want to talk to him on a professional level, I would say you could, put 3 sentences together and send it to Catherine at Drag City.
Yeah.
Because I think at this very moment, I think David might be in Chicago staying at the Drag City building.
Okay.
He's done that over the past few months. He's gone and had extended stays up there, and I think he's in the midst of one right now. I think he's doing pretty good. I think his concerns over the power that his dad has over society at large and him specifically have been pretty, have overshadowed a lot of things over the past 6 or 7 years in David's world. And unfortunately, he lost his mom earlier this year, who he had a strong and loving relationship with. One potentially positive thing that's happened as a result of that is I think it's maybe jarred him a little and helped reawaken him to a world at large that includes his friends and includes his work in a way that doesn't involve his dad. And hopefully that will continue. I mean, I think people have been seeing more of him and hearing more from him, and I think there's the potential that as his fans and audience members that we will as well in the future more than we have in recent years.
Okay.
And partly as a result probably of this trauma occurring this year, but these are things that happen in our lives.
All right, well, I appreciate you even fielding this because it's not really nothing to do with you. But I just, him and I miss him.
Well, one thing that I didn't, a question that you sort of alluded to, if you didn't directly ask earlier, you were asking about Drag City and how I became, how I came from here to being associated with Drag City, and it comes back to David because there was, I still marvel. And I know I have this tendency, I know I have a narrow vision of the world, and I try constantly to open it up as wide as possible without endangering myself. But I marvel at like this period of when I was sort of gave up the pursuit of acting as a career and started working on music. And I know I was listening to records all the time and I was reading all the time, but this was say 90, 91. At that time, I didn't know certain things. I didn't know what who Pavement was, for example, even as much as I was listening to records, and I didn't know. I started making some recordings with Todd Brashear, and I sent 2 songs as a demo to Interscope Records at the time to see if they wanted to do a 7-inch because I didn't know what Interscope Records was or anything like that. And I sent it to 3 labels, and Interscope was one. And only years later did I think who the fuck was I? What did I think they were? But that one of the labels was Drag City, and the only reason I sent it to Drag City was because I'd met this woman named Tanya Small who'd said I want to give you my band's 7-inch, and she beats on some boxes or something like that on the Silver Juice single, the first one, the single, but the 7-inch. It's the Diamond After the Reef EP.
Yeah.
And I listened to it and I loved it and I loved everything about it. I loved everything about it. I loved the way that it looked, how many songs were on it, how they sounded, how the performances on it. I just thought this was great, and I loved the Drag City logo. So when we had these recordings, I sent the demos to home. I think Gerard Cosloy was still at Homestead.
Mm-hmm.
I sent it to him, and I sent it to Interscope because this guy named Robert Nettlekoff was friends with a woman who worked there, and he just gave me her address. And then I sent it to Drag City because I had the Silver Juice 7-inch, and I didn't really know anything else about Drag City except for the existence of this 7-inch record.
Well, so that's...
And I thought, well, this is a cool label, and obviously they're wanting to put things out that are very are very pleasing and and complicated, and that they seem to have a nice attention to detail, because, as I said, I even like the logo and yeah.
Wow.
And then David, and I first met David face to face, I think, during the recording of the first Palace Brothers record. He came through Louisville with Bob Nastanovich, and they came by the house where we were recording, and just hung out for an hour or so. But so it's all tied in.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
that's
talking to David.
I appreciate you calling back to that. You're right. I didn't get a chance to ask the question directly, and I appreciate it because I've never heard that story before, and it's that's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you're talking to him, convey to him that I'd like to talk to him and I miss him, and I will send a note to people at Drag City, because I think I should finally do. I for some reason it just comes up every few months, and people think of me. They ask me. Because, as I say, I've spoken to him a couple times, and they just go find David Berman. So
yeah, it would be. He similarly to he is somebody with whom one can have a conversation that one cannot have with anybody else on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's language used and directions taken in conversation with David that do not happen with anybody else, and 94% of the time it's for the better.
Yeah. Okay, so then just chatter about David is occurring on the podcast. We're just talking about David because we love him. I love him, and I want to bring him up to people. And at some point, there is this sort of rumor happening that something's going on with David, that maybe he's working on something. And I reach out to Bob Nastanovich of Pavement and Silver Jews, friend of David's, to ask him about David. And we have this, again, it ends up being a big episode because Bob talks a lot about Stephen Malkmus, and about how they've tried to make Pavement come back, and how whether or not that's working out. But in the process, Bob told a pretty amazing story about an experience he, Stephen, and David had together in New York. And just for fun, I'm going to share a bit of that with you right now.
Since I was 18, and I was friends with David and Stephen, because those guys are not the easiest guys to bring together. They weren't really too close in college, and then their closest period was between 90 and 93, when we all lived in New York, and that they worked together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So they spent a lot of time together, and I think what sort of really brought them together was that the New York scene back then was really pretty harsh from the standpoint of snobbery. It was strong, there was a core of it was kind of based on adoration of grunge,
mm-hmm.
and there was there was it was also kind of built around the record store, Pure Platters and Hoboken, and then a few clubs, Maxwell's being one, and the Pyramid, and CB's had gone pretty indie grunge at that point, and there's a few more, but it was a good time to be in New York City in terms of really cool things coming through. I mean, obviously bands always go and play New York City, some people even come over internationally and do a one-off or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
It was a good time to be there. But we were sort of viewed as the three of us were sort of viewed as these who are these jerks from who knows where they came from, or kind of looked upon as invaders and it's smart asses,
Yeah. I could see that.
But it sort of culminated in one particular Nirvana show at the Pyramid Club, in which was of course packed to the gills, and it was before Nirvana was huge, but they still were big in New York, and it was like the C&B scene show of all time. And it was before Dave Grohl was in the band and all that.
Yeah.
And David and I decided to heckle Nirvana just for the fun of it. And we immediately got a rise out of Chris Novoselic, and David and Chris Novoselic really got into a back and forth of vocal sparring, insulting each other. And Stephen, at first Stephen was kind of ashamed and got kind of away from us. And then he realized that we were sort of it was interesting. He realized that he should ally himself with his friends. So, because he realized that easily this whole situation could kind of turn against us and be pretty ugly, but whatever. After only about 4 or 5 Nirvana songs, they lost it. Kurt lost it. They did their whole routine where they destroy their stage, break a bunch of their gear, and they quit and wouldn't play anymore. And that was sort of really mainly due to David. I'd gotten to the point where he was being so effective and his voice is so needly and snarling that I was feeding him lines in addition to his own material. And then, so the show ended, and I remember carrying David around the waist, around the crowd while he shouted at the top, which requires a lot of strength. He's big. And he screamed at the top of his lungs, Sub Pop Destruction. He was just sick of just the immense sort of there's the snobbery based upon adoring Sub Pop bands in New York City at the time. You know what I mean? It was just come on, man, they're cool and everything, but there's nothing that's all, we're all big fans of Nirvana. We all, whatever, we were kind of ashamed of ourselves. But the amazing thing was, so we're outside, and back then there was a grocery store across the street where you get a 16-ounce Budweiser, a can for $1.
Uh-huh.
We were outside drinking our $1 beers, congratulating each other, and literally in droves, people would come by us and tell us how much they hated us and what a horrible thing almost people were they were so upset. People were almost crying. There's so much venom coming towards us. It was amazing. That kind of might have further linked us together. And we all spent a lot of time together anyway, but it was during that sort of period that Silver Jews were formed, and Silver Jews were really formed because we had a friend, actually we're still friends with a girl named Tanya Small who worked at Pure Platters, the record store, and she went out with the proprietor of Pure Platters, and she gave us Thurston and Kim's phone number, and which I can still remember to this day, 212-219-2658. Obviously now for several reasons it's defunct. But
I'm sorry,
we used to call that number.
Shouldn't be laughing.
We used to play the first 15 or 20 Silver Jews practices. We'd make up songs, and we'd think we'd gotten to a point where it was cool, kind of in a Dead Sea sort of way,
Yeah.
And then we'd call their home phone, and if they answered, of course, we would just hang up. I don't think they had caller ID or anything. But if we got their answer machine, then we'd go, we'd play the song into their answering machine, and that was pretty much how the band existed. That's how, that we just wanted to be on Ecstatic Peace or something.
Are they now aware that you used to do this?
Oh yeah, Thurston. Yeah, no, I mean, I obviously became friends with Thurston a few years later, and he thought a lot of it was cool.
Oh, nice.
I don't know what Kim thought of it, but Thurston was kind of right up his alley. Being a bunch of weird kids and calling up his answering machine, and playing 4 minutes of noise is the kind of thing that he would get into to this day.
Yeah, yeah. Wow,
So,
I did not know any of. I can't believe you guys willfully ended a Nirvana show. That's
yeah. We did quickly.
And this was real. You say heckling, so I kind of thought it might be a joke, but this was real.
No, it was vicious. It was vicious heckling, and it got to the point where Chris Novoselic was his retaliatory comments towards David were sort of based on incorrectly and unknowingly on David being a jock, which of course David really wasn't. He was, in fact, I think he quit playing soccer when he was like 6 or 7 years old. He's a terrible athlete. To watch him run is hysterical in its own right. But yeah, no, it was weird. And but no, those things are. I only always told the truth. Really, I've got no reason to lie.
Yeah. Do you actually remember
unless it's about something important?
Right.
Like that?
Do you remember specific volleys between the two, between Chris and David? Do you remember specific words?
I just remember him calling David a jock, and like that was his whole tack. Like, all we need is like jocks that are. I guess it was sort of like, well, we've gotten so popular now that we have jocks at our show or something. But like David wasn't a jock, and I can't. David's were like harsh and they were short. I think David was mostly like calling Chris Novoselic a dork, if I recall, which was, of course, extreme hypocrisy. But it was just whatever. It didn't matter what he was saying. It was just whatever he could get a rise out of him for,
Okay, so again, that was February 2015, roughly. And I don't know what's going on at this point, but I know that I've sent Drag City Records some emails about speaking with David. I think when Early Times came out, I asked again. I just, throughout the time he was kind of absent, I would ask Drag City if he might be up for chatting, and they always said no, he's not really in the mood for that. And then on June 24th, 2015, at 8:50 in the evening, I received this message. Hi, Vish. I wish I could tell you that I'm ready to do an interview, but I am not. And it's not a case of kind of sort of preferring not to. I'm decisively against doing them. But because I notice you care and I don't notice anyone else caring, I would like to make a promise to you that when or if the time comes, I will do that first interview with you. Cassie sends her regards. David. David emailed me directly. Now, again, I don't exactly understand what possessed him to do this. But he did. And, I wrote back something effusive. And then over the next 4 years, we would email each other about various things. Music we were interested in, stories, kind of weird music folklore things. And I'll keep some of that. I'll keep all of that between him and I. Those are correspondences, and I shared the first one with you because I'm just telling you that I didn't know him at that point. I knew him deeply on some level from his work, but to have your hero reach out to you and email you and make such a promise, really, I mean, I don't know what I did to deserve any of that. But anyway, so I'm still obsessed with Silver Jews. I'm obsessed with David's poetry and work, but living my life and talking to whoever I can talk to for this show, as some of you would know. Among the people I speak with, Dan Bejar, Destroyer. And again, I'm starting to hear rumors that David went up to talk to Dan, or went up to work with Dan, I should say. And this intrigues me. I'm like, what? What is this about? What are they working on? And so Dan, and I'm just looking it up. I'm a little unprepared. Dan is on the show, this show, for like the third time, I want to say. Yeah, Dan has been a frequent guest. We're talking about his latest album to date, which is Ken. And so, yeah, November 29th, 2017, episode 368 of Creative Control. Dan's on the show. And I put it to him. I asked him about David, because I've heard he might be working with David. And here's a very typical Dan Bejar response to this. I have to ask you about something, because I heard a rumor that you were working with my hero, David Berman. David Berman of the Silver Jews. Someone told me that he was seen in Vancouver and that he was hanging out with you a little bit. Is there any truth to any of this?
David went on an extended 8-month West Coast walkabout, and a couple months of that were spent up here in Vancouver, and we did hang out a little bit.
Okay.
While he was here.
You hung out as friends. You've become friendly with David?
Yes, we hung out as friends, yeah.
Okay. When did you become friends with David, if I might ask?
A little bit over the internet.
Sure. Now, is it a situation where
he came to a solo show I played in Tennessee last fall.
And did he express some admiration for you then?
I can't remember what we talked about,
He showed up for the show, which is a sign that he was interested in you. And are you a fan of his?
Yeah, I would say, the Silver Jews record and his writing are definitely a part of the Destroyer origin story in a pretty big way. Yeah.
Yeah, he's, if I have an origin story that no one wants to read, I do. No one wants to hear it. But if I did have one that people wanted to hear or read or see on the big screen in Tinseltown, I think he would be a fundamental block in my foundation. He is a huge influence, and I miss him and his work dearly. So for people who don't know, he basically retired Silver Jews after kind of coming out, playing shows. He had never played any shows for like the first 15, 20 years, it felt like, of the band's existence. And then all of a sudden he was doing it. And then he retired it completely. And I have to say, I was intrigued by this rumor that you two people might be hanging out. I can't help but wonder if brains were picked, if ideas were exchanged, that kind of thing.
At some point, decades from now or tomorrow, David will have all those answers for you.
Okay. I have to send you want me to email David? Is that what you're saying? You're not encouraging me to email David, but I could. I mean, I could email David. I mean, we've been known to exchange the odd message. I could send him a note and just say, "Hey, what's happening?" and see what he says.
I mean,
it's none of my business, really.
I could tell me what he says. I could probably email him as well. We might get different answers.
Right, because you met him on the internet. That's how you. That's how you.
We both know him through the internet, right?
That's true. So there's something there. I don't know what's going on. I emailed David, and he proceeds to tell me that something went down, and David starts sending me song lyrics to something he's going to call Purple Mountains. He's pretty sure he's going to call it Purple Mountains, and it's just going to be a bunch of 12-inch singles or something is his plan. He has all these ideas. Dave was really full of ideas. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I don't understand. And he's like, he's going to send me an MP3, and he's just all excited. He wants to share all this stuff with me. And again, like, we've spoken a couple of times, but he's so giving and forthcoming and appreciative, I think, of my interest in him. I was saying this to my wife the other day to try to make sense of my relationship with David, because I'm a fan. And then we became pen pals over email. We would email each other a bunch. And what I've come up with is, and I think what maybe resonates with some people who listen to this show, is that I have a genuine love for the people who are on my show. And I've kind of was saying the other day to my wife, I feel like when I engage with someone and their work, if everything's going well and I'm having a good day and I'm prepared, I've had the time to prepare, I am so engaged on some level that I feel like I've said everything to this person just shy of I love you. I express an interest in what they've said on their records or their work, and I've tried to break it down on some level to try to figure out what it says about them. And I think maybe that resonated with David. Maybe he knew I loved him. I never told him I loved him, but maybe he knew. So anyway, he's starting to share this information with me about his work. And no one, as far as I know, like there's no inkling of this, really. And that was episode 368. I probably checked in with him about being on episode 400. A milestone episode. I was probably interested in having him on, and again, he would defer. But then, in the fall of 2017, we discovered that my mother had cancer, and breast cancer, and it was this had never occurred in our family really, so we were just sort of slack-jawed and in shock about it all, and her status was not looking good. She quickly went from stage 2 to stage 3 breast cancer, and surgeries, mastectomies, and all those things were in the works. Lymph nodes removed, and it was just looking bad. And I was in, my whole family was in rough shape, and I was among them, really bad shape. And so when David checked in about something, or I don't know how it worked out, but I told him what was going on, and he empathized. He lost his mom to cancer, and he didn't have a chance even to... He told me he didn't really have a chance to even say goodbye. It happened so quickly, the diagnosis and her passing away. And so I think we related to each other on a whole other level there as sons in pain, and I guess. And he would just check in all the time. How you doing? How's your mom doing? So most of 2018 was a fog and a blur to me, but David was there. So it was very kind of surreal, frankly. But that just elevated my... Obviously, that's a very personal thing. It's a personal connection that maybe... I'm starting to... Since David's passing, you're starting to see people circulate little anecdotes like that David would express real concern and care. I mean, you're also hearing about how funny he was and how antagonistic he could be with certain people, and he was very opinionated and all those sorts of things. But this loveliness about him that I think I knew of from his work just crystallized via email, mostly. And then 2019 rolls, and my mom, by the way, goes through all the shit, chemotherapy and the radiation therapy and another surgery, and she's okay. As I speak to you, she's okay. She's and David, I even when I told David that she was okay, he would still send me messages making sure she was okay. Still. And so that's a huge part of my memory of David now. This unlikely personal... It's inexplicable to me. Despite what I said earlier about this potential rapport thing that I seem to develop with people, and I don't quite understand what he saw in me, but he saw something in me, and I obviously saw something in him. And anyway, I've already tried to explain this. I don't really know. I'll never know. But anyway, January 2019 rolls around, and then there's an announcement, a rumor that David... It's what he's already told me. Purple Mountains record will be coming out. That's the name of the group. And, no, sorry. Yeah, that happens in January. Sorry. In November or December or something like that, there is some kind of thing that circulates that maybe this is happening. And so I write to David to be like, hey, is something happening? I think that's what happened. I don't know what happened. But in any case, in December of 2018, David says, yes, it is. Here's the album. Sends me the new Purple Mountains album as a 45-minute WAV file. It's not broken up as songs. It's just one giant file. And I've documented the listening experience I had with the Purple Mountains album already when David was just on the show in June, I guess it was, right? Is that when I posted it? We spoke in May, and I think I posted it in June. So if you want to hear more about that, or you've probably already, if you've heard that, then you've heard me and David talk about how, like, I initially was like, this is amazing, I can't believe it, I'm so excited, and then the more I listened to the lyrics, the more I realized he was really in pain. And so anyway, the announcement comes out. They're putting out the record. It's going to come out in July, I think, is what gets announced. And then I'm contacted by Catherine at Drag City, who says, yeah, David wants to talk to you. He's not talking to many people, but he wants to talk to you and a couple other people. And I'm struck by this email I received from David in 2015, where he said I'd be the first person he speaks to if he does an interview. And so that, him honoring that in this current noise of promotion and obligation and empty promises that you sometimes encounter in music and art, he remembered, and I mean, it's phenomenal to me. So we talked, we did the interview, and the caveat of the interview was, it was originally only going to be a print interview for a magazine piece for Exclaim, and I sort of said, well, I'd like to present it on my podcast, and David was resistant to that. He has expressed to me in the past that he's not the best off-the-cuff speaker. He doesn't really have a good feeling about such things. I'm not dealing with David on this. I'm dealing primarily with Drag City. So I tell Drag City, well, listen, why don't you tell David that he can vet the audio? I don't do this often because it can lead to lots of frustration. But I say he can vet it. He can, if he doesn't like something he said or wishes he could say it differently, we can fix it. Like I'm happy to do that. I've never done it before, but I'll do it. So I'll do the print piece and we'll do the audio piece, and that'll be two things. And they say, okay, well, I'll ask him. And then they ask him, and he's like, yep, David's into it. He's totally into doing that. So we do the interview. It's done over Skype, and I can see him. He can't see me. I turned the camera off. I'm just adding that as a note. And the interview feels good. I'm a little concerned about him, but he's cogent and he's fielding all the questions, and it's a good chat, I think. So I run an edit of it. I do an edit of it, the audio, and I write directly to David after to say, David, I've done an edit of the audio. Do you want to hear it? And he says, is there a transcription? And I said, no, I mean, the piece I'm doing for Exclaim isn't super, I don't think it's going to be long enough for me to do an entire transcription of everything. I was just going to transcribe what I thought was pertinent. If you want, I can send you that stuff. And he writes back, I don't need to approve it, Bish. It's fine. So, I took it as trust at the time. I have some fears or worries about it now. Anyway, the thing goes out, and people who are fans are very exuberant about it, I guess, for the most part. I mean, I've gotten lots of messages about it, and I feel a lot of questions about it. And I checked in with David a little bit about it, and we mostly talked about other stuff, frankly. I mean, I didn't really ask him what he thought of it or if he listened back to it. I'm sure he didn't. And the album comes out, and everyone loves it. I mean, I love it. Write about it for Exclaim again, and go to Sappy Fest. I go to Sackville. I go on a trip with my family in the Maritimes of Canada, and I'm at a music festival in Sackville, New Brunswick, called Sappy Fest, and everyone I talk to wants to talk to me about David, about how much they appreciated our chat and how much they are happy he's back. And we get back on the Tuesday night, and I tell myself, I'm going to write to David and tell him this. and then Wednesday rolls around and it's too late. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about him with you. I've never done this before on the show, but I wanted the conversations and emails and exchanges I've had with David are so meaningful to me that I just want to talk about it a little bit. So again, back in 2008, David and I had a chat for my CFRU campus community radio show that I did with my wife. We called it the Mish Vish Interracial Morning Show. It's the first time we really talked on the phone, and the album had been out, Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea, but there's also this documentary coming out called Silver Jew, and he was about to take the band on the road again. And I want to share that conversation with you. I've had a lot of trouble listening to David's voice since it was announced that he was gone, that he took his own life. Just sadness. I was texting with Bob Nastanovich today, and I just said, the feeling is I feel haunted. I feel haunted by David. And that's not to blame him. That's just how I feel. That's how I just don't feel. I don't feel like myself. I feel well enough to do this, to try to remember him in some way and share that with you. But I feel haunted. And I dredged up, I tried to find WAV files of this conversation with David from 2008, and they look terrible. I mean, I have evolved. Once on the show have I dipped into the archives of my past to play something and post something, and that's when Gord Downey was, it was announced he had terminal cancer. And I went and found that audio and I shared it. And I've never done this before, really, other than that. But I went to my basement and I found the mini disc recording of the phone tap interview that I did with David. So I'm going to play it for you now. I don't normally, I just don't dip into the archives, I think, for my own sake. It's like showing someone a video of how you learn to walk. I know I've gotten better at this kind of thing, the interviewing and the talking to people over the years. So you kind of want to keep that up. A lot of what we do, I've talked about this with artists, a lot of what we do in this realm, public realm, is you're learning in public. And people are like, hey, can you find that interview you did with so-and-so from 2007? I'm like, I don't really want to. I'll talk to that person again, but I don't really want to go back because I know I would do it better now. But I listened back to this and I've tried to fix it a little bit as much as I can so it sounds good. And it's fine. It's good. It's a good conversation. I think I'm there. I'm ready to talk to David. And he inspired me to be okay at what I was doing, and he's great. I mean, the stuff he has to say is insightful and thoughtful and as funny as ever. So this was, I made a note of this. When is this conversation from? Did I make a note of this? Oh yeah, I did find this. Hang on a second. I think this was recorded. This conversation with David was recorded in 2008, but I want to get the exact date for you. I feel like it was Friday, June 27th at 3 p.m. Please call David at this number. This is 2008. So that's when this conversation occurred. I will play it for you now. In editing this, it's the first time I've heard David's voice since he passed away, and I hope it helps you. I hope it gives you some more insight into him if you need it, and I hope we're talking about him forever, and listening to his music forever, and listening to interviews and reading his interviews. I don't want to spend any time trying to convince you if you don't already think of his greatness as a thing. I don't want to spend much time insisting upon it, pushing you on him. I think he's a rare artist in that the genius of him is apparent by absorbing the work, listening to it, reading what he has to say, listening to what he had to say. That's all there is to it. I knew it the second every time I started a record by David, I was transported from the start. That's a connection I had with him. And over the years, it developed into something deeper on some level. And I will never get over this, ever. And I love him. I always will, forever. And I think he knew that. And that's it. So take care of the ones you love. Reach out to people who are struggling and tell them that you love them. I wish I had written to David to tell him that he was loved one more time. But I didn't. And I hope you reach out. If you need help, if you know someone who needs help, I hope you will help them. And yeah, that's it. Sorry, it's a ramble. This is why I don't do monologue shows. I didn't write anything down. I just went for it. And I hope this was interesting or something. And if whatever this was worth, here's me and David Berman in conversation from Friday, June 27th, 2008. Thank you for listening to this show. Thank you for listening to Silver Jews and David Berman. Enjoy this. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Mish Vish Interracial Morning Show on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph. My name is Vish, and it's time once again for our weekly artist profile. This week's guest is a genuine hero of mine who hails from Nashville, Tennessee, and leads Silver Jews, one of the world's most intriguing and influential bands. Releasing records since the early 90s and a poetry book entitled Actual Air in 1999, he is regarded by many as underground music's greatest poet, and his refusal to ever tour behind his charmingly dark songs inadvertently made him a mythical enigma. Things changed in 2005 when he emerged from a dark period, released the highly acclaimed album Tanglewood Numbers, and decided to travel the world and encounter many Silver Jews fans for the first time, leaving Nashville for locales as exotic as Tel Aviv and Vancouver in 2006. Last month, Drag City Records brought us another perfect Silver Jews record in Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea, and the label is also scheduled to release a film called Silver Jew, which documents the band's 2006 tour of Israel. Today, I'm so unbelievably thrilled to welcome this gentleman to our program to tell us more about his work. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in saying good morning to David Berman. Good morning, David.
Hey, Vish.
How are you?
I'm doing real well.
Are you still awake? That was a long intro. I just felt like I needed
That just summed it all up for me. It was good. I needed a reminder of all that.
Well, I must say I'm very thrilled to have you on the show. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, David, I'd like to begin by discussing Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea. Now, I'm hesitant to say that this is the cheeriest Silver Jews album, but particularly after the opening number, What Is Not But Could Be If. The record's story-based songs are, I think, uniquely introspective and somehow less dark. There's less use of I as a pronoun and perhaps even a lot more we's, which to me suggests more of a collective than individual perspective. Now, I've loaded up this question pretty good, but I'm wondering if you can yourself distinguish Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea from other Silver records.
Yeah, well, I think that the album is a lot closer to, the songs on it are a lot closer to just sort of classical songwriting, and they're not as idiosyncratic as far as, I think, the other albums. They're very particular to me. Mm-hmm. One of the things I've always noticed is people don't really cover Silver Jews songs, and I always thought, well, I think there's a reason for that, and they don't make good covers. They're not really sort of general or universal in the sense that someone else can kind of step in and take over the song. But this time I felt differently about it, and I on purpose was thinking about songs, how they might be covered. So I purposely, I guess, wrote them sort of on a more public level, and they're a lot, the songs are a lot less about me, I'd have to say, directly, and are more artistic creations in the conventional sense.
Do you think that actually draws a little bit of a distinction between a prose approach versus a poetic one? And I'm not saying that the line is that clear,
Yeah.
but these do seem to be kind of tales, whereas some of your other songs are more, and I assume they are. Obviously, you've taken some artistic license with those as well, but they seem to be less story oriented. If that's one way of putting it.
Well, I think the other ones, the meaning is definitely more associative, and there's not necessarily a theme for every song that you could sum up in a sentence.
Yeah.
But the tact on this album is different. I think there is a theme for every song. There is a I say in a way I'm pushing these songs forward, whereas before I would say I was maybe pulling them out. And I've noticed that that people's definition of poetry, or what is poetic, is very interesting. This album is more closer to common speech. There aren't there isn't as many sort of strange compound sentences or phrases, and I can't explain that anything else except that it's an artistic development. Maybe this is an arc of my life has been towards communication and away from mystification.
Sure,
I think like what you were saying in the introduction about the not playing live, a certain mystique would develop around me. Now I kind of see that as unearned, an unearned positivity, something that someone might try to culture. And so I think in a way I'm kind of moving against that and reaching for clarity, and sort of forgoing the pleasures of being unknown. And so.
No, that's a very interesting way of putting it. I hadn't thought of all those things. And you've included a chord sheet in the record as well for people to play along.
Yeah. I always thought that was strange that no one did that. And you can really think about it pretty hard. I mean, I go through a lot of records. I've seen a lot of records in my time, and you never really see that. You never see, and so to me, that. What does that mean? If the chords are there, it's an invitation to play the songs. If they're not there, and they're never there, it seems to me there's some suggestion that there are listeners and there are players.
Right.
And that wall is there, and it seems to me that people like that wall.
Yeah.
Especially, I think, the bands on the other side of it. They want creation, or the creation of music, to seem like a difficult thing. And it is a difficult thing. One of the risks, I guess, about like putting the chords in there, or you think, well, it looks easier than it is. If you look at country music and you look at the chord structure and how they're really all simple 2 and 3 chord songs, you might think, well, then they must be simple to write, but they're not. So I think another thing, as I have to say to be fair, is that my music is so simple that you can do that. But I don't, I think that the fact that I only really use these 16 really simple chords to write all the songs is, for me, it was like this kind of realization, well, that's the case about my music. How can that be changed to be an advantage? Because I normally look at everything negatively, about myself, perhaps, let's say. And so I would think negatively, well, my music's so simple, I use the same chords, and they're always in the same key, and this was a way I figured, well, I could turn it to my advantage, because people with more complex music can't really share it,
right?
With a beginner, for instance. But these songs, anybody who took a little bit of time, who'd never played guitar before, could play these songs. So I was really excited that somebody might learn guitar based on the album.
And it stems from this kind of thoughtful approach to inclusiveness that you've not quite.
Well, had. Yeah, and also I feel like it's sort of like I don't know. I guess I'm sort of like a whistleblower or something. I'm like, this isn't that hard, Come on, look, I'm blowing the whistle on the, because I really do feel like people pay a lot of lip service to, indie music privileges this sort of, fan-band relationship.
Yeah.
But still, there aren't people teaching classes on how to write songs, even though it's very easy.
Right.
There's really there's a way to go after to learn how to write songs if you're an aggressive person or really want to or feel a talent, and you go and you might go out and get a book, or you might seek lessons or a lot of practice. But there's also another way, which is you could play some Silver Jews songs. They're very simple.
That's a good point. It's true. Yeah. Well, you've worked with a lot of session players, and Silver Jews has had a loose membership really until now. How has playing with your wife Cassie and having a regular gang of musicians with you affected you as a songwriter?
I don't know if it's affected me as a songwriter because I'm not always positive who's going to be the band when I'm writing the songs. But this time I was, so it did actually affect this time, because I don't know if it affected the writing, but the experience of going out and playing live with these guys, the experience of playing live affected the songwriting.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I try to write a song, I make sure that it's something that could just be carried based on some words and some chords. So to me, anybody could play the song with me.
Right.
And the fact that Brian and Tony and Peyton and William and Cassie were the band in 2006 when we toured. We know they all work together. They all know each other. They all live in town.
Mm-hmm.
And practicing it was, more extensive maybe than before. But usually there's not a lot of forethought, and especially for the basic tracks. And these guys are, close friends from around town.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess what I'm saying is that there's not a big difference between having players in town. I guess if I was more the type to keep a band working, keep the band on, but I turn the band off when the records are done.
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of keeping the band on a little bit because we played the shows last month, and in the fall we're going to do it again. But I think after that, I won't assume that that's the band anymore.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. One of the things that has struck me about the last few Silver Jews records in particular is the manner in which you've really, to me, resuscitated country music in a lot of ways. When I listen to, for example, Look Out Mountain, Look Out Sea, I feel like I'm hearing country in its most genuine form, with I hear echoes of Nashville running through your music and lyrics as well. Would you say that the city's history and sounds have affected your work in any way, and how do you fit in there? You've been living there for a little while now.
Yeah. Well, I don't fit in anywhere in the music scene per se, but the history, and as an observer of the music scene, I'm definitely, I actually watch things like the CMA Awards, and I keep myself pretty familiar with what's going on Music Row. But of course, what I'm really interested in country music is the classic songwriting, and from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and I think that definitely I'm the type of person I'm pretty solitary, so it's me and my environment. And my environment in Nashville, you can't really forget where you are. There's reminders all around me. I mean, every day when I drive to the store, I have to drive by this street called Elvira, which was inspired a really corny country song.
Right.
And Pee Wee King's mother-in-law used to live in the house across the street, so I always think about that when I'm there.
Uh-huh.
And I'm aware of where Harlan Howard used to live, which is sort of nearby, and I'm always I guess I'm in the presence of those people in my mind as much as my contemporaries.
Right.
And I do think that I looked away from country music for a while, in a way because I found the world of alternative country to be a real turnoff. And so I think that stupidly, maybe, I shied away from country forums for a while because of that, and maybe I feel it's safe again. But I don't know. I do know that, things that country music used to do, the storytelling capacity of country music has really narrowed. And it's become a certain kind of celebration of small town values over and over and over and over again. And that's what you really hear. And it's crazy, it just bothers me, but that's what people write, that's what people put out, that's what people want to hear right now, where people seem to feel really threatened, they feel like their values are threatened. And, I feel like people's values are threatened by other things, like commerce. And so, I don't know too many country songs that want to say anything negative about construction downtown. That's a positive thing in the conservative country world. And it is true that back when the war started, there was some terrible, very coercive, threatening, intimidating music coming out of Nashville that really was sort of embarrassing to me. And I would write letters to the paper about it quite often. And I think I've been glad to see that settle down a little bit. But
did they print the letters?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I came down so hard on Charlie Daniels a couple of times. I was actually frightened because his fans are so. He's really become a real red, white, and blue, jingoistic, threatening type of guy who still tries to trade on his long-haired country boy reputation or whatever at some point when hippies were opposed to rednecks. But now that he's got the unified redneck patriotic movement, he's become like the head. They actually have a Charlie Daniels gift shop downtown, which is just really a way to sell American flags. And they used to have the Bobby Bear, stuffed bear shop when I, first moved to Nashville. That was what was downtown. So that pisses me off.
No, I understand. It does seem like you have an affinity for the city, but are equally conflicted about it.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and that tension is interesting to me.
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to live anywhere else, and I think when I live or have lived in places where a lot of artists have lived, I don't have that tension that I guess I started having when I was a kid in Dallas. And living in, I've always done my best writing and living in sort of Republican provinces. And so.
Yeah, no, I can see how that would work. Yeah, for sure. Well, right now I thought we could actually listen to a song from Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea, and I was hoping you might pick one for us to hear there, David.
Well, why don't you play Suffering Jukebox?
That's a great song.
It's about Nashville, I think.
It always reminds me of the Spring Water.
Yeah, well, that's a jukebox that
I don't know why. It's like one of the few places I've been in Nashville is like the Spring Water and Music Row and all that stuff. But I don't know. Every time I hear Suffering Jukebox, I just picture in my mind.
That's a good place to picture. I mean, definitely in the daytime at the Spring Water, you are looking at some real despair, the daytime drinkers, the Vietnam vets, and I'm usually thinking probably about the rounds that you might make as a day drinker, which Spring Water you would definitely hit.
Right. For those who don't know, the Spring Water is like a bar in Nashville, just so if that wasn't clear. Sorry. Okay, well it's a great song too, so let's go with that. We'll be back with more with David Berman, but first here's Suffering Jukebox from Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea on the Mish Vish Interracial Morning Show on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph.
some. It ought to make a few reputation in the cult of number one. While these seconds turn these minutes into hours of the day, while these doubles drive the dollars and the light of day away.
Suffering jukebox, such a sad machine. You're all filled up with what other people need, and they never seem to turn you around. Got a lot of chatterboxes in this crowd. Suffering jukebox in a happy town. You're over in the corner breaking down. They always seem to keep you way down low. The people in this town don't want to know.
Well, I guess all that mad misery must make it seem true to you. But money lights your world up. You're trapped, what can you do? You got Tennessee tendencies and chemical dependencies. You make the same old jokes and malaprops on cue.
Suffering jukebox, such a sad machine. You're all filled up with what other people need. Harshness, damnation, and guilt make you wonder why you are eating pills. Suffering jukebox in a happy town. You're over in the corner breaking down. They always seem to keep you way down low. The people in this town don't want to know.
You're listening to the Mish Vish Interracial Morning Show on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph. That was Suffering Jukebox from Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea by the Silver Jews. Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea was released on Drag City Records on June 17th. For more information about this and other amazing records, please visit dragcity.com. If you're just joining us, our special guest today is, in fact, David Berman. Thanks again for being on today's show, David.
Thank you, Vish.
It's a great thrill to have you on our show. I must say, we've had many people I admire on the show. I never thought I would be speaking to you on our show, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, it's good, and this is definitely the first time I've spoken to Canada in a definitely a long time.
Oh, well,
7 years. I'm happy to be. I've never even been to Canada except for Vancouver.
Right.
And I'm going to be up there this fall. I really do look forward to it.
Oh, awesome. Well, I hope you have a good time, and we'll be telling people more about the specific dates in just a bit. But now we have work to do. I have more questions for you.
All right.
Now, so much has already been made about your decision to finally tour with Silver Jews in 2006, after basically refusing to do so, I suppose, for more than a decade. I'm not sure who you were refusing to do so. Who you know what I mean? It was your decision.
You have to say no.
Yeah. You had to say no to somebody anyway.
Yeah.
Now, I got to see a show from that first tour in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And not only did you seem to be loving the experience, you seemed genuinely grateful to the people who came to see you. And then after that, you seem to be playing everywhere in the world all the time. And as we were saying, another long Silver Jews tour is scheduled to begin this August. What surprised you the most about being on the road, and why does touring now appeal to you so much?
Well, first of all, I guess I'd say I'm not so sure I love it.
Oh, okay.
I do. I mean, I really do like being out on the stage.
Did that sensation surprise you? How much you loved it?
I did really like it, and it did surprise me. And it surprised me that I feel very comfortable doing it. I guess what I feel uncomfortable about is maybe the climate in which I've decided to finally tour is so merged with the internet economy, and there's a lot of disturbing. I think there's a lot of money out there that sort of no one's talking about, like in the festival system.
Oh,
the bands are making a lot of money, and it's strange to me. It's a different world than I remember when I was someone who used to go to a lot of shows.
You feel like
90s.
You feel like perhaps it's obviously less of a struggle for some bands, but I'm just trying to think of festivals you've played. I know you've played Altamar's parties and the Pitchfork Festival. Are there other things?
And I like the festivals, and they're easy. It's an easy job, and maybe I feel guilty that maybe I just am trained to think that work should not be easy.
Sure.
So maybe there's a certain amount of guilt to it. I don't know, but we did those shows in 2006. We did 45, and then we did 15 last month, and then we're going to do 30 in the fall. I'm not so sure we'll do any more after that. I mean, it's ridiculous to predict, but I don't know that I want to become the type of person that's available for live appearances. That I'm not so sure I want to make being a musician or make being a performance artist part of my life, and performing art is part of my life. And I guess what alarmed me is that I always felt, well, that could never be the case, because I found playing unappealing, and now I find that it's appealing and it's lucrative. And so there's two reasons why I might want to do that. But the part of me that's an artist that thinks about what's the best for my art, and when I do, doesn't want that.
This is one of your points early in your career when people asked you about touring. You would say, "Well, no, I'm a writer, and I need to be at home."
Yeah.
Doing
and I
that.
think I think that I've seen too many examples of songwriters who couldn't write songs after a while, and I don't know any other commonality except between songwriters that writers don't have, except that songwriters travel around and play live, and they play their work over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe a lot of the time when writing could be written, songs could be written, when writing could be developing, people are touring. They're playing their songs over and over again. Instead of writing a new song, they're playing the same song over and over again. Maybe they waste their time. Maybe the time passes by, and when they, sort of try to grow as an artist, they discover that they've cashed it all out. And so, I guess on a timeline for an artist, I'm young. I'm 41.
Mm-hmm.
But on a timeline for a songwriter, I'm old. And I think that I don't want this. I want there to be a lot of new writing. I want to get better. I don't want it to be the end. I can't. People can't give me enough examples of songwriters who've been able to write late into life.
Right. I appreciate what you're saying. It's interesting to me that, why even agree to do this fall leg of the tour if you're already feeling like maybe that'll be it?
Yeah. Well, I guess because I do feel like I have to make an effort. The last album came out and I toured. And
how did the success of that album vary compared to others?
It sold a little bit more than the others, but not a lot more. The touring, in other words, wasn't, like people would say over the years, oh, you would be selling a lot more records if you'd been touring after every album and building an audience and stuff.
Right.
So I guess I'd have to do that maybe twice to see if there was any truth to that.
Right.
I mean, I do, want more people to buy the records or to hear the records. And they all basically sell about the same, which to me is probably a good thing. I might say, well, like, look at a band that started out around the same time as me, Sebadoh.
Sure.
They sold a lot of records, but then they're sort of irrelevant now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe, not being that popular, not ever being the flavor of the month, is probably pretty good. Staying under the radar keeps it going. And I'd rather stay at the same level than to have an up and down career.
Yeah, I mean, so much of that stuff is kind of out of a band's control in some ways. I mean, it's part of the sort of hype system.
Right. Well, I mean, it is within the band's control depending on, how much they want to participate in it.
Sure, that's true.
I guess that's what I'm saying about the festival system, is that I think that, there's a lot of, here, the feeling is sort of like, people feel like the culture's at a tipping point, and a lot of commerce is going on, and the criticism and the critique of the commerce that's going on with the music industry has just basically stopped.
Mm-hmm.
There's no dissent, there's no critique at all anymore. Maybe in Canada there is.
Well,
but
I mean,
in the United States, it's over. You can't find, people will say something, you'll read an article about Sonic Youth, and it'll say something like, they've just, they put together this record with Starbucks.
Yeah.
And on the bulletin boards, people went crazy with anger, and then the writer's always saying, aren't those people foolish? Because, Sonic Youth is just trying to get their music out to people. But the thing is, the lie is that there aren't people out there complaining about it. If you go out and you try to find the blogs where people are commenting on what does it mean that Sonic Youth is partnering with Starbucks, you won't find them.
Huh.
And so to me, part of the strange thing is that there's this insistence that there's old-fashioned people with old-fashioned ethics who don't like people selling half their record to a car company.
Right.
But where are those people? They're really actually a paper tiger just used to promote the idea that it's okay to sell half your albums to a car company. That's really what drives me crazy. I would be a lot more comfortable with what I'm doing if there were critiques of what's happening in the system.
Right.
But I think what people are seeing is there's no critique going on, so let's cash in.
Right.
And that makes you wonder, was it all about peer pressure? And I think it was. I mean, when Sonic Youth put on the back of their album, "Fuck the PMRC,"
yeah.
Did they really mean it? Well, no, because, I mean, up to that point, they'd never said anything about the PMRC. Mm-hmm. And since then, just the last month, Be Your Own Pet on Thurston Moore's label had the main label, Universal.
Yeah, they rejected the
makes
record.
Ecstatic Peace what they used to call a fake indie.
Yeah.
They don't say anymore because you would have to call Ecstatic Peace fake, and you're not allowed to do that.
Right.
And, what happened? Be Your Own Pet had songs taken off their record because they were too violent. And no one in the Be Your Own Pet or at Ecstatic Peace made a deal out of it.
Yeah.
They just went along with it. So what did it mean? What did any of that mean? And that's what bothers me, I think.
No, I can understand, and I can understand why you might want to withdraw from it as much as possible. And I also think we could probably have a 20-minute discussion just on this, but perhaps we should move on.
Yes, let's move on.
But I appreciate your thoughts very much. David, I want to ask you about this film, Silver Jew, which documents your band's tour of Israel. Now, even though it's framed a bit like a family vacation, it really is a powerfully personal and revealing film. How did the idea for it come about?
Well, it was like a lot of things. It just sort of happened. We were going to Israel, and a friend of ours from Nashville decided that it was something he wanted to document. Mm-hmm. So he came over with a camera and followed us around. I don't know that I thought that anything would come out of it. And in fact, when we got back and he told me that he wanted to make something out of it, I was really skeptical about it.
Mm-hmm.
And to the point where I still have never seen it.
Yeah, I'd heard that. I was going to ask if that was true. Why won't you see it?
I guess I didn't want to see it because, well, this is a perfect example. I'm not very good at speaking off the cuff. And when you're just traveling around and meeting a lot of different people and speaking off the cuff, I wasn't willing to see. I'm sure I say things that I don't agree with, or I'm sure I exaggerate or contradict myself. All these sort of things that I wouldn't allow in a piece of art that I controlled.
Because it's in the moment and captured on film.
Right. I'm not editing it.
Right.
And I knew that, well, number one is I can't edit it because what would happen would be I wouldn't find anything I liked. I would want to take everything out.
Huh.
So I had a choice between, trying to edit it or just not looking at it. If I wanted it, and so I thought, well, I could just have some people I trusted watch it and approve it for me.
It's quite a lovely film, I think. If you don't mind me saying, I know you haven't seen it, but it's a very interesting film from almost every angle, from that of a music fan and from someone just sort of interested in you, and I think the kind of spiritual element of your life, I suppose.
Well, I think that's why I let it go, because what I was made to believe was that it was a good thing to release because people don't see examples of intelligent people, critical minds dealing with spiritual things.
Yeah.
And so I felt like if that was part of it and that was captured there, then it wasn't my right to pull that away because it's a rare thing.
Right.
And then when, I was, aware that there was a scene with me when I get tearful at the Western Wall.
Yes.
And that was another thing that I thought was a reason to release it, because you don't ever see people who from a fan's point of view, cry. And so I thought, then that's something that needs to be out there, because I always want to do whatever's counterintuitive.
Right.
If there's like a way to do something that no one's doing, like putting the chord sheets in the CD,
yeah.
or releasing a film with you crying, then I want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of anything singular.
Yeah.
So I let it go, and it's strange because I don't even want to have a video made unless I made it up. I don't, anything that comes out from the Silver Jews, I want it to be that I made it. So it is different because I didn't make this, and Jack City's going to put it out. It's kind of like playing live. I'm just sort of, okay, well, I'm saying yes to things in general in my life, and I did have to say no for years, and I said no to a lot of things, and I tend to just sort of as a matter of course in the last couple of years try to throw myself curveballs almost. Whenever I'm insistent about not doing anything, I make myself do it almost as an exercise.
Right.
Or I often try to do, to surprise Cassie. It's important for me that every once in a while I do something that she knows I can't stand, or she thinks she knows I say I can't stand. I don't want to be predictable in any way, but I am somewhat. So I try to throw that off. I have a lot of opinions, and my opinions are just that, opinions of a human being, and they don't always correlate with reality, and I realize that, and so I sometimes have to shove them off.
Right. At one point in the film, you say, and I know you haven't seen it, so I'm going to sort of... this is kind of a spoiler for you if you ever do watch the film. At one point in the film, you say you wouldn't have been able to experience Israel as profoundly if you weren't there on tour. You make just to clarify that point, you make a reference to experiencing Israel as a tourist versus as a musician.
Yeah.
And that seems to me to speak to the power of music as much as it does spirituality. How has your renewed faith in Judaism affected your writing? I know I've been asking about various things and their effect on your writing, but I feel like there's all these sort of extenuating things now that you've added to your life. This is one of them. How has all of this affected you?
Yeah. I think that, I think you can probably see it in the album when you said that it's more cheerful.
Yeah.
And it's more hopeful. I don't think that I'm as comfortable with nihilistic conclusions. I am definitely more interested in, even just reading the Torah regularly has interested me in, we were talking before about the lyrics being more or less poetic, and there's a certain kind of poetry to the Bible that I never really understood before until I started reading it in the Jewish Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with meaning, having to do with syntax and order and sentence structure. There's like lines like someone used this as an example in a review of unpoetic line.
Mm-hmm.
The days turn the weeks into months of the year. And it's just a lyric in a song.
Yeah,
and
the seconds turn the hours into days. Yeah, it's something like that.
Seconds turn the minutes into hours
right.
of the day. And both of those lines, a person said, now anyone could have written those. And, the irony is that they sound like something anyone could have written. They roll right off.
Yeah.
But if you Google them, no one's ever done that. You can Google books, you can Google, but that order, that sentence order, where seconds, minutes, hours, and days, and then in the other one, days, weeks, months, and years, are put in a single sentence with, 2 beats in between each one of those nouns.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a very complex sentence. That is a very hard thing to do.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is that what we are used to thinking of as poetry is really purple.
Right.
What normal people call poetic is something that's one kind of poetry, but it's the poetry we associate with floridness and ornateness.
You feel like everyday language is being taken for granted?
I think everyday language, when it has structure to it, there's a beauty to it that it's. I don't know if it's taken for granted. I just think that people don't look for meaning in what they think they see the plain sense in.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
And so, in that way, I would say it could be taken for granted. I do think that it's difficult for me to see that in America today, that it's not considered poetic to use clear language, that people aren't getting the message of what's happened to poetry since William Wordsworth,
mm-hmm.
And Walt Whitman. They're not getting the message that there's poetry to simplicity, and poetics it should be spare and simple, and that overwriting is not poetry.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what people in lyrics, they tend to associate as poetic.
Right. Well, finally, David, I appreciate all your time. I know the upcoming tour is looming large in your vision, but are you working on anything else, either Silver Jews related or otherwise? We've been talking about poetry. You've released one book thus far, and it's such a stunning book. Are there other projects that you want to tell us about?
Well, I'm just putting together this summer a book of drawings, maybe you could call them. They're sort of like, what I do. They're sort of like primitive, psychedelic New Yorker cartoons, I guess. And so
okay.
I'm putting together probably, I guess, the first Drag City coffee table book.
Oh, that sounds very exciting.
Yeah, that's what I think it'll be.
And so you're putting it together this summer, but it's coming out whenever.
It will probably take into the fall, I'm sure.
Okay.
And I'm just practicing for the tour coming up and trying to improve my in-between song banter and things like that.
I think your banter's fine, if you don't mind me saying. As I recall, I only saw you guys the one time, but...
Well, thank you.
Yeah. There's some good banter on the film, too, if you ever get around to putting it in. It's you'd surprise yourself, I think. I want to thank you again so much for joining us again today, David. It really means the world to me.
Thank you very much, Vish.
You're welcome. I want to tell people that for more information about you, they can visit silverjews.net, and that the new record, Lookout Mountain, Lookout Sea, is available now. And for more information about that and the upcoming Silver Jew DVD release, please visit dragcity.com. David, is there a date yet on the DVD?
I don't think so, but maybe September.
Yeah, I'd heard September.
Yeah.
Speaking of September, also note that the band is in Toronto on September 2nd and they're in Montreal on September 3rd. We were talking about their Canadian stops, and there you go. Before we go, David, I thought I'd ask you to pick another song from the new record for us to hear. And,
all right. Why don't you play Strange Victory, Strange Defeat?
An excellent song about squirrels, it seems.
Squirrels breaking out.
Okay, let's go with that. I appreciate that. Here's Strange Victory, Strange Defeat by Silver Jews on the Mish Vish Interracial Morning Show on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph.
Imported from Connecticut just in time for fall. How much fun is a lot more fun, not much fun at all. What's with all the handsome grandsons in these rock band magazines? And what have they done with the fat ones, the balls and the goateed? Strange victory, strange victory, strange victory, strange defeat. The tale is told of a band of squirrels who lived in defiance of defeat. They woke up in a nightmare world of craven mediocrity. They said, we're coming out of the black patch, we're coming out of the pocket, we're calling into question such virtue gone to seed. Strange victory, strange victory, strange victory, strange defeat. Strange victory, strange victory, strange victory, strange defeat.
In any case, I do appreciate this very much, and I'll check in with Catherine about when it should come out and all that stuff.
All right, yeah. If you have any questions, just email me.
I will. Thank you. Are you doing okay? I know we just established you're doing pretty good, but off the record, you're doing well?
I'm doing well.
Okay, good. So Canada is coming. Okay, you'll be up here sometime in the fall, it sounds like.
Yes, I will be, definitely.
Okay, I'll send you a note or something just so we can maybe connect.
Okay. All right, peace.
All right, David. I will talk to you very soon. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.